A man sits alone in his car. Sweat rolls down his temples. His eyes flick from mirror to dashboard to the slow-moving streets of early morning London. He turns on the radio. A traffic alert. Congestion reported near the Smithereens app headquarters. Please avoid the area. Thousands of miles away, in a pristine glass home on the California coast, Billy Bauer, part tech messiah, part corporate monk, kneels on a meditation mat. His eyes are closed, his breath steady. Through his earbuds, a mindfulness coach whispers, "Don't respond to pain. Just observe it." A shaky live stream feed. A flustered reporter yells over sirens. Police negotiations are still underway. The suspect demands a direct phone call with the Smithereens CEO, or someone might die. Within 30 seconds, Smithereens throws us into a war zone, one with no bullets or borders, only platforms and protocols. This is a clash between a broken man and a billion-dollar machine. Between grief and the algorithm. Between trauma and the total indifference of the systems we now worship. And this isn't just the beginning of an episode. It's the end of something we've all quietly been participating in. On the surface, Smithereens is a hostage thriller. Chris, a rideshare driver in London, suddenly pulls a gun on his passenger, a young intern named Jaden, and takes him hostage. His only demand? To speak directly with the CEO of Smithereens, a fictional social media giant clearly modeled after Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram combined. As the police swarm the scene and the company's legal and PR teams scramble from a distance in Silicon Valley, one fact becomes increasingly clear. Chris isn't a terrorist. He's not a political radical. He's not even angry at the world. He's just broken. And it all started with a single moment, a moment when he looked at his phone while driving, killing someone he loved. That phone, that app, that one notification. Now he's not asking for vengeance. He's asking to be heard, to be seen, to speak to someone. But no one, not even the CEO, seems capable of giving him that. The deeper we go, the more Smithereens reveals itself not as a story about violence, but a story about silence. The kind of silence that swallows pain when no system is built to hold it. Despite its slow pacing and minimal use of sci-fi gadgets, Smithereens might be one of the most brutally futuristic stories Black Mirror has told. Not because it shows us what tech can do to us, but because it shows us what tech won't do for us. This isn't about dystopian surveillance or AI rebellion. It's about something worse, the emotional outsourcing of human pain to platforms that were never meant to feel. Chris isn't invisible because he's quiet. He's invisible because nothing he's feeling is measurable. His sorrow has no metric. His guilt has no conversion rate. His grief doesn't trend. In a world governed by data, he is data without engagement. Therefore, he does not exist. The brilliance and horror of this episode is that even when Chris finally gets his phone call, we, the audience, never hear what he says. The call is cut. The story ends in ambiguity. And the only thing that remains? Notifications, texts, breaking news, push alerts. The world scrolls on. That's not a twist. That's a thesis. Even your most intimate sorrow in a datafied world is just another unread message. The real mystery, not what happened, but why the system was built this way. Unlike other Black Mirror episodes that lean heavily into plot twists or sci-fi reveals, Smithereens keeps its ultimate enigma off-screen. We don't know exactly what Chris says on the phone. We don't know whether Billy feels guilt, fear, or just mild curiosity. We never even get a clear look at the app itself. Why? Because creator Charlie Brooker is doing something far more dangerous. He's turning the camera back on us. Why do we need to hear the phone call? What would we expect it to sound like? Redemption? Catharsis? Smithereens refuses us that comfort. Instead, it makes us sit with a terrifying realization. Chris didn't want blood. He didn't want fame. He wanted a system to acknowledge that it had, in some small way, participated in his pain. And it couldn't. Not because it refused. Because it wasn't built to. This is not a hostage crisis. This is a negotiation between humanity and a platform that doesn't speak our language anymore. Smithereens is not about tech addiction. It's not about corporate irresponsibility. It's not about mental health, per se. It's about the abyss that forms when grief has nowhere to go. It's about what happens when silence becomes systemic. And worst of all, it's about what we do when the last thing we need is empathy, and the only thing the system offers is terms of service. The true terror in Smithereens isn't that Chris takes someone hostage. It's that he had to. Among all the episodes in Black Mirror, Smithereens stands alone, not because of its speculative fiction, but because it barely uses any. No futuristic implants, no AI consciousness, no virtual afterlives. What makes it chilling is precisely its refusal to invent technology, choosing instead to weaponize the one already in your pocket. Charlie Brooker began writing Smithereens not from story prompt, but from a moment of quiet terror, checking his phone at a red light and realizing he'd remembered nothing of the last 10 minutes of driving. That lapse, micro, ordinary, unremarkable, became the basis for what he later called a non-malicious social homicide. He was haunted by news reports of fatal accidents caused by drivers glancing at notifications. One real case involved the father whose child was killed because he looked away from a road to check a push alert. No drunk driving, no mechanical failure, just 1 second of misdirected attention. Originally, the script leaned toward vengeance. Chris was to hijack a corporate plane, storm Smithereen headquarters, and lead a live-streamed public tribunal on corporate negligence. But Brooker eventually discarded that approach. Anger, he said, is too easy. I wanted sadness. He stripped away the bombast and kept the wound. Andrew Scott was not the first choice. Brooker imagined someone younger, digitally fluent, a man of the algorithm generation. But Scott brought something raw and timeless, grief without spectacle, pain without melodrama. His audition revealed a man not raging at the machine, but quietly decaying inside it. After Scott was cast, the character of Chris was rewritten as older, quieter, and more tired, not furious, but hollowed out. Director James has also introduced method-style immersion techniques. For 3 days before filming, Scott was placed under a digital fast. No email, no phone, no screens. He stayed alone in a rural guest house, journaling and walking in silence. When filming began, the disconnect was real. The camera was handheld. Natural light was used. The cinematography was intentionally unpolished, evoking CCTV footage or body cam chaos. The effect, a realism so disarming it felt like documentary horror. A notable deleted ending nearly changed the tone entirely. In that version, after the call with Chris ends, Billy Bauer stares at a real-time user engagement dashboard and finally presses a large red pause button labeled Global Feed Flow. He watches as all Smithereen activity flatlines, then closes his laptop in silence. Brooker scrapped it. That's fantasy, he said. We don't want catharsis. We want confrontation. So the episode ends not with justice, but with noise, a gunshot we don't see, push notifications we barely hear. The screen fades out. The feed scrolls on. And you're probably already checking your phone. Glitch aesthetics and the collapse of attention. Smithereens is perhaps the most visually unadorned Black Mirror episode, and that's precisely its weapon. There's no futuristic sheen, no augmented reality overlays. Instead, the cinematography is aggressively mundane, shot in shallow focus and handheld instability, mimicking a world where no image ever truly lands. It scrolls, jitters, loops. In the early scenes, Chris driving through London is shot in such tight framing that the city outside becomes irrelevant. The world is there, but inaccessible. His face, slightly sweaty, stiff, is all we see. This echoes his emotional claustrophobia, his life reduced to a screen-sized tunnel of guilt. Throughout the hostage standoff, the editing switches between claustrophobic close-ups and disembodied aerial drone shots. The effect is jarring. Humans viewed as data points, watched from above but never understood. This drone aesthetic isn't just surveillance, it's dehumanization masked as oversight. Crucially, the sound design is near ambient. There is no score to manipulate your feelings. Instead, low electronic hums and muffled outside noise create an eerie vacuum. Especially in the transatlantic call between Chris and Billy, the sonic contrast is striking. One sits surrounded by sirens, the other by birdsong. The call is clear, but their worlds are not. This is not dialogue. It's cross-network despair. 3 men trapped in different algorithms. Chris, Jaden, and Billy form a triangular character structure. Not hero, villain, and sidekick, but victim, proxy, and ghost in the machine. Chris represents the casualty of inattentive design. He doesn't want revenge. He wants validation, that his loss wasn't just collateral attention damage. Jaden is a stand-in for the always connected youth, hyper-literate in systems, but emotionally outsourced. He's not evil. He's just optimized to obey. Billy is the most unsettling. He's compassionate. He meditates. He's not that kind of CEO. But his very detachment, his ability to step away while the system runs on, is what makes him dangerous. He is a moral vacuum maintained through delegation. These three never share the same space, but they are narratively entangled in a feedback loop of impotence. Chris seeks justice, but grabs the wrong lever. Jaden suffers the system's consequences, not its benefits. Billy has the tools to change the rules, but lacks the courage, or maybe the bandwidth. Prayer in a post-God age. One of the most chilling scenes is also the quietest. Chris sits alone, muttering a prayer. He's not religious. He's not performing. He's just asking. The camera rotates above his head in a slow spiral, like a drone or a forgotten god with a cracked lens. It's not judgment. It's observance without meaning. This scene is not about faith. It's about the instinct to reach for an external listener, even when all we know is that nobody's listening. God has been replaced by algorithms. The altar is the screen. Even the name, Smithereen, carries weight. Originally meaning shattered fragments, it's now the corporate brand of emotional atomization. This company doesn't make users, it repackages them into attention metrics. By the end, no one is healed. But everyone has been watched. Narrative lag and the architecture of fragmented empathy. Though Smithereens appears to follow a linear timeline, its storytelling is riddled with delays, omissions, and carefully timed reveals, mirroring the fractured way we now process real-world information. For most of the episode, we have no idea what Chris is really after. His motivations drip-feed into the narrative only halfway through, when he confesses that he caused his fiancée's death by checking a notification. This isn't a mystery built for suspense. It's a structural mirror of how emotional understanding now requires patches, updates, and backfills. We don't empathize up front anymore, we load people's truths over time. Billy Bauer's arc is built on the opposite mechanism. When we meet him, he's meditating. There's no context. Only when Chris gets him on the line do we learn who he is, the CEO of the very machine that wrecked Chris's life. By delaying this reveal, the show activates a bias pre-fill in viewers' minds. We judge Billy before we know Billy, just as social platforms teach us to. This reversal is no accident. It reflects a broader theme. What you believe about people depends on when and how you receive their data. In this sense, Smithereens is a meta-commentary on interface design. Its narrative is built like a social media feed, fragmentary, addictive, and deliberately ambiguous. From satirical whiplash to meditative suffocation. James Hawes, a BBC veteran known for period dramas and political thrillers, approached Smithereens differently than Charlie Brooker's usual mode. Brooker's fingerprints are often seen in ironic reversals and stylized digital aesthetics, like White Bear's looping reveals or the national anthem's grotesque punchline. Hawes rejected all of that here. There are no flashy overlays, no data visualizations, no techno glitches. Instead, Hawes traps us inside an emotional glacier, slowing the pace to suffocating stillness. This is not satire. It's endurance. He directs not with outrage, but with stillness, making you live in the long, slow moments when no push notification can save you. Even more striking, Smithereens completely avoids showing the tech. The app's interface is never displayed. The audience never sees the UI. Why? Because the tech is no longer external. It's in the nervous system. You can't see it anymore, just as you can't unfeel its influence. That's the point. Technological indictment or humanist dirge. Critics remain split on what Smithereens is really about. Tech-forward reviewers, The Verge, Wired, read it as a direct condemnation of attention capitalism, with Chris as the algorithm's first martyr. But others, like cultural essayist Zadie Smith, argue that the episode is actually a grief narrative disguised as a tech thriller. The social media stuff is incidental. The heart of it is existential. Some psychologists have even proposed a symbolic breakdown. Chris is not against the system. He is a crash artifact of it, an emotional cache that never cleared. Jaden represents the acceptable error rate of the digital age. Billy is the hollowed-out executive shell of the platform, meditatively detached from the harm his code causes. By this reading, Smithereens isn't so much a warning about social media as is an elegy for the death of catharsis. The feed has absorbed mourning. The system has absorbed agency. And there is no fix pending. The attention market and the collapse of autonomy. Chris's breakdown wasn't just the result of personal guilt. It was the logical endpoint of a world in which attention has been fully commodified. In traditional societies, attention was structured by physical presence, human rhythms, and shared rituals. But in the modern attention economy, focus is extracted, monetized, and algorithmically directed. Humans become nodes in a behavioral network. Chris didn't kill his fiancée by choice. The system did, by designing an ecosystem in which distractions are irresistible. That is the horror of Smithereens. It reveals how choice becomes meaningless when the environment itself is coded to override your autonomy. His tragedy is not an accident. It is a product feature. Billy Bauer, the elusive tech CEO, is not an evil mastermind. He is something worse, a well-meaning void. Once an idealist, he is now a ghost in the machine, a figurehead for a system that no longer needs him to function. His meditation isn't repentance. It's institutionalized denial. The system doesn't evolve by fixing itself. It evolves by numbing its architects. Why this story was always going to fail. The brilliance of Smithereens is that the tragedy doesn't arise from malice, but from mutual misrecognition. Chris, Jaden, and Billy operate on entirely different discourses. Chris speaks the language of grief. I need someone to hear me. Jaden speaks the language of process. You've got the wrong guy. Billy speaks the language of abstraction. I'm sorry this happened to you. Each is sincere. None are compatible. What we're watching is not a negotiation. It's a distributed system failure. Each character represents a node in a fragmented social OS. Chris runs on emotional pain, Jaden on procedural obedience, and Billy on cloud-based ethics. The result is not violence, it's noise. The system can't crash. It can only loop. A civilization where everyone screams and no one hears. In the end, Smithereens isn't a story about social media. It's a fable about the death of mutual legibility. We live in a hyperconnected world, yet our loneliness has never been more algorithmically managed. Chris doesn't want justice. He doesn't even want closure. He wants a witness. A human. One person. One moment where his pain isn't just absorbed, sorted, and stored by a machine. In that sense, Smithereens is a funeral for empathy, for intimacy, for any conversation not mediated by platform architecture. The final montage, the world spinning on, people scrolling, walking, meditating, says everything. Nothing changed. Nothing stopped. And that, perhaps, is Black Mirror's most disturbing ending. Why was this episode so polarizing? Smithereens provoked one of the most divided responses in Black Mirror history. Critics and fans were split into two camps. Some dismissed it as too grounded or not sci-fi enough, while others hailed it as the most terrifyingly real episode ever made. The polarized response is precisely the point. Smithereens doesn't offer speculative horror. It reveals the horror already embedded in your daily interface. One Hong Kong reviewer put it succinctly. No twists. Just the kind of truth that makes you afraid to open WeChat. In the UK, it ignited broader discussions about platform ethics and user harm. BBC Radio 4 aired a post-episode special bluntly titled, "This Isn't Sci-Fi. This Is Your Phone." The Guardian praised it as a quietly apocalyptic tale and noted how its restraint is its power. There's no bomb, no twist, just a man lost in a world that shrugs off his screams. Perhaps most remarkably, the episode inspired a short-lived but intense Twitter campaign. #PutYourPhoneDown, urging users to attempt digital detox for 24 to 72 hours. No institutional change came from it. But Smithereens achieved something rarer. It reminded people that information overload is a form of psychological violence, the kind you only notice when you try to stop. A tragedy with no villains. What makes Smithereens feel so suffocating is its complete lack of an antagonist. There are no evil masterminds, no shadowy cabals. Yet a tragedy unfolds. Why? Because the episode demonstrates a systemic conspiracy without conspirators. Chris did something illegal. Jaden did what he was trained to do. Billy did what little he could. And still a man died. This is the new moral terrain we now inhabit. Everyone influences the outcome, yet no one can be fully held accountable. It reflects a real-world pattern. The Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, TikTok's addictive interface loops, YouTube radicalization algorithms, all disasters produced not by villains, but by systems optimized for engagement. What Smithereens makes terrifyingly clear is that the worst atrocities may now come not from malice, but from indifference built into the system itself. When neutral tech breeds biased outcomes, the core ethical dilemma raised is this. If a platform merely delivers content, but does not directly harm the user, how responsible is it for what follows? The Smithereen app didn't kill anyone. It just made notifications hard to ignore. That was enough. Chris looked down for 1 second and lost his future. This is where Smithereens becomes prescient. It demands that we rethink what ethical neutrality means. Because neutral design doesn't lead to neutral outcomes. It might exacerbate loneliness. It might deepen addiction. It might bury grief under infinite scroll. So here we are, in a civilization where no one pulls the trigger, but the interface keeps loading the bullet. Fragmented cognition and the hollow syndrome. The proliferation of social media has led to the fragmentation of individual attention, presenting information in disjointed snippets that disrupt coherent cognitive structures. This continuous influx of fragmented input hampers the formation of a unified self-narrative, leading to a state known as the hollow syndrome. This term, rooted in psychological studies, describes the inner emptiness individuals feel in a highly connected society, characterized by loneliness, confusion, and a lack of meaning. In the episode, Chris embodies this phenomenon. He seeks meaning through social platforms, but becomes lost in the sea of information, ultimately resorting to extreme actions. This psychological state is increasingly common in real life, particularly among young people, where excessive use of social media correlates with mental health issues. Addiction mechanisms in social media. Social platforms are meticulously designed to enhance user engagement by leveraging psychological reward mechanisms. Features like likes, comments, and shares activate the brain's dopamine system, creating pleasure upon receiving feedback and forming a positive feedback loop. This mechanism resembles the intermittent reinforcement seen in gambling, where uncertain rewards are more likely to lead to addictive behaviors. Moreover, social media exploits the social comparison mechanism, causing users to feel anxious and dissatisfied through constant comparisons, thereby increasing usage frequency. Such designs not only affect individual emotional states, but also contribute to attention deficits, hyperactivity symptoms, and depression. Multidimensional psychological interpretations. Cognitive psychology, the collapse of meaning under information overload. From a cognitive psychological perspective, Chris's breakdown is a textbook case of cognitive overload collapse. Cognitive science tells us that our emotional states and behaviors are shaped by how we process, organize, and interpret the information we receive. When the volume of incoming stimuli exceeds our brain's capacity to process it, we encounter cognitive distortion and disintegration. Chris isn't just carrying guilt, he's drowning in conflicting mental narratives. On one hand, he sees himself as a good person. On the other, he knows his inattention cost someone their life. This internal tug-of-war creates deep cognitive dissonance, a clash between incompatible self-beliefs that his mind can't reconcile. Add in the constant push notifications, data streams, and reminders of a digital world that refuses to pause, and it becomes clear. His internal meaning-making system has collapsed. What follows is not just emotional turmoil, but a complete breakdown in decision-making, manifesting as desperate, erratic behavior. Chris doesn't act out of madness. He acts from the cognitive exhaustion of a man who can no longer string together a coherent story about who he is or why any of this matters. Behaviorism, the addictive loop of platform-driven conditioning. Behaviorism, especially B.F. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning, offers another layer to Chris's crisis. In this view, behavior is not born from internal thought, but molded by environmental reinforcement. And few environments are more perfectly engineered for reinforcement than social media platforms. Chris is the product of what behaviorists might call a dopaminergic training system, a reward architecture built on likes, shares, and intermittent notifications that keep users hooked. The platform has conditioned him to respond to every ping, to chase every digital interaction like a lab rat chasing pellets. His attachment to his phone is not volitional, it's habitual conditioning, sustained by variable ratio rewards akin to those in slot machines. In this framework, Chris's downward spiral isn't just personal tragedy, it's the inevitable result of behavioral engineering. He isn't using the app is using him. Psychoanalysis, subconscious guilt, and the drive towards self-destruction. From a Freudian psychoanalytic lens, Chris's behavior can be interpreted as the eruption of unresolved inner conflict, a war between his ID, ego, and superego. His guilt over the accident has taken root deep in his unconscious, and with no external outlet for justice or forgiveness, it metastasizes into self-directed rage. What he truly wants isn't compensation, it's punishment. This guilt isn't just emotional, it's existential. Chris has become fixated on Billy, not because Billy directly harmed him, but because Billy represents the faceless system that allowed it all to happen. In Lacanian terms, Billy becomes a symbolic other, a screen onto which Chris projects the entire structure of his suffering. His violent outburst is a kind of subconscious ritual, a perverse atonement, an attempt to absolve guilt through spectacle, even at the cost of his own life. He doesn't want to be saved. He wants to be seen and judged. Humanistic psychology, a desperate reclaiming of the self. Where psychoanalysis sees pathology, humanistic psychology sees a cry for meaning. Thinkers like Maslow and Carl Rogers argue that humans are innately driven towards self-actualization, the realization of one's full, authentic self. In this light, Chris's actions, however extreme, become legible as a desperate bid to reclaim personal meaning in a system that has rendered him invisible. He's not just grieving. He's protesting. Against a world that reduces trauma to click-through rates, that collapses mourning into metadata, Chris demands recognition. Not sympathy, not apology, recognition. In humanistic terms, his hijacking of the situation is a last-ditch effort to break through the noise and assert his subjective agency. He is not a case study. He is not a user profile. He is a person with pain, and he refuses to let that pain be minimized into platform analytics. He doesn't want to die. He wants to matter. Is Smithereens a warning or a mirror? Since its release, reality has caught up, perhaps even surpassed, Smithereens' grim projection. In 2021, whistleblower Frances Haugen testified before Congress, revealing that Facebook's internal research confirmed that their platform intentionally stoked emotional intensity to boost engagement. The media labeled her the real-life Chris. Netflix's The Social Dilemma echoed this, detailing how color cues, ping frequency, and UI scroll velocity were designed not to serve users, but to keep them addicted. What was once fiction now reads like forensic analysis. We're not moving towards Smithereens. We're already in it. A 2023 Lancet Psychiatry study reported that 1 in 5 global social media users experience cognitive fog, compulsive checking, and emotional disconnection, a condition eerily similar to what Chris voices, yet no one in the story hears. What he calls not being able to stop thinking, we now call neuroalgorithmic trauma. Can the system be rewritten? Despite the inertia, global institutions are attempting to push back. The EU's Digital Services Act mandates opt out of algorithm, design, and audit transparency for major platforms, directly challenging the black box logic exposed in Smithereens. In the U.S., California's Children's Online Privacy Protection Act limits behavioral tracking, while France's proposed notification detox law aims to enforce mandatory digital silence windows in workspaces. Even tech giants are making gestures. Apple's screen time tools, focus mode, and nudges to unplug seem cosmetic, but they represent a subtle ethical turn, platforms surrendering tiny bits of user attention for the sake of mental clarity. It's not a revolution, but it's a crack. And cracks let light in. Why Chris still matters? Chris fails, in a literal sense. He doesn't dismantle the company. He doesn't save the world. But what he does accomplish is profound. He inserts a moment of hesitation into a system built for infinite forward motion. He makes Billy stop meditating and start listening. He makes a global audience stop scrolling for a second. He reminds us that even in a fully automated attention economy, there is still space for intentional friction, for slowing down, for refusing to be optimized. Resistance doesn't need to be effective to be meaningful. Sometimes just interrupting the cycle is enough to assert your humanity. That is Smithereens' truest lesson. You can't outcode the machine, but you can still choose to not cooperate. From meme to methodology. Though Smithereens lacked the viral momentum of San Junipero or the aesthetic resonance of Nosedive, it cultivated a slow-burn legacy. The term Smithereens syndrome circulated among Reddit and Twitter communities, referring to the emotional burnout of passive scrolling and overconnectedness. On YouTube, creators mimicked Chris's monologue style, most notably in the video essay, "I know you're watching me, but I can't stop," which garnered over 1.3 million views and ignited discussions around algorithmic entrapment. Academically, the episode became a case study at Oxford's Internet Institute and featured in Zurich University's 2022 syllabus for digital anthropology. MIT Tech Review cited it in their passive user design ethics report, marking a rare crossover between fiction and framework. 4 underseen works that echo Smithereens. Perfetti Sconosciuti, Perfect Strangers, 2016. An entire dinner unravels when everyone places their unlocked phones on the table. Why it fits. It flips Smithereens' premise. Instead of silence, it explores what happens when no digital secret remains hidden. Searching, 2018. A father uses digital footprints to find his missing daughter. Every clue is on screen. Why it fits. Technology as both salvation and suffocation, echoing Chris's desperate navigation of the digital labyrinth. The Assistant, 2019. A young woman endures systemic exploitation in a powerful company, speaking rarely but seeing everything. Why It Fits captures the ethical paralysis of witnessing harm while being structurally voiceless. Watchmen episode, Little Fear of Lightning, 2019. A character uses a tinfoil-like helmet to block psychic intrusions, symbolizing a need for mental firewalling. Why It Fits, visually and metaphorically aligned with the desire to shield oneself from informational contamination. For books that diagnose Smithereens disease. The Attention Merchants, Tim Wu, charts how media, ads, and now platforms monetize your focus. Core to understanding how Chris became a casualty of an economy that treats time as a resource. The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff, explores how data extraction becomes behavioral manipulation, directly relevant to the Smithereen platform's ethical vacuum. So You've Been Publicly Shamed, John Ronson, investigates how online mobs erode empathy and inflate retribution. A haunting parallel to Chris's struggle to be understood without being scapegoated. The Lonely Century, Narina Hertz, combines neuroscience and sociology to unpack why we feel more alone the more connected we are. A spiritual companion to Smithereen's silent montage finale. The silence of systems and the desperation of the individual. Chris doesn't topple the system. He doesn't spark a movement or inspire revolution. He simply drowns slowly, painfully, in an ocean of noise. His crisis isn't a private psychological defect. It's a symptom of a world designed to ignore anything that isn't monetizable. Smithereens is brutal because it offers no redemption. Chris isn't saved. Billy isn't heroic. Jaden is just a cog. This isn't a story about people. It's a story about what happens when people try to speak to machines. And the result isn't an explosion or blood or chaos. The result is that the world scrolls on. Business continues. Everyone checks their phones, as if nothing happened. That is the real dystopia, not collapse but normalization of collapse. Billy Bauer's line, "I'm listening now." He thinks he's offering empathy, but all he's really doing is pausing long enough for the noise to subside. This is the lie embedded in modern digital culture. We're listening when what we mean is, we'll let you talk, then we'll move on. What if Chris hadn't turned to violence? What if he made a podcast, wrote a Medium article, or filmed a heartfelt TikTok monologue? Would we have listened? Or do we only hear suffering when it screams? While Smithereens doesn't feature a traditional post-credit scene, director James Hawes revealed in interviews that an entire subplot was cut from the final edit. Chris originally tries peaceful routes, calling customer service, hiring a lawyer, setting up a public info booth. But no one responds. Not once. Not ever. These scenes were cut to heighten the emotional impact. But their omission changes the narrative. Chris wasn't radical from the start. He became radical because civilization gave him no other feedback loop.